Check this.
Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this is a response video to non-competes rejecting capitalists for fun and profit. So I'm going to play his video, and I'm going to comment on it and show the flaws in his arguments. So let's watch his video.
This is Bob. Bob makes bicycles. It's hard work putting together bicycles by hand in a dusty garage, but Bob loves the work. He loves making high-quality products and selling them to folks in his community at a reasonable price. It takes about 5 hours for Bob to make a bicycle, and he sells each bicycle for $100. Of course, Bob has to pay for parts and materials to put them together, and that comes to about $50 per bike. So at the end of the day, Bob makes about $10 per hour building bikes. But why do Bob's neighbors pay $100 for a bike? They could, after all, just buy $50 worth of parts and put them together for themselves. The thing is, Bob's neighbors don't want to put together bicycles themselves. For Bob's neighbors, it's worth paying an extra $50 to not have to do all the work of putting together a bicycle. That work that Bob puts into building a bicycle is called labor value. The concept of labor value was developed by Adam Smith, you know, the invisible hand of the free market guy. He explained labor value like this.
The real price of everything that everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it is the toil and trouble of acquiring it.
In other words, according to Adam Smith, Bob's customers pay an extra $50 because they don't want to perform the labor of building the bicycle themselves. Over time, Bob earns a reputation as a really good bike builder. He gets so many orders that he can't possibly keep up with the demand by himself. So, being the entrepreneur that he is, Bob decides to hire his first employee. Bob manages to find a skilled bicycle mechanic named Kate who can also build a bike in 5 hours, the same amount of time as Bob. Now, Bob's company can build twice as many bikes in the same amount of time, which means he can pull in twice as much money. But Bob doesn't pay Kate $10 per hour, he pays her $5 per hour, $25 per bike, and pockets the other $25 for himself. Remember, Kate's labor value is exactly equal to Bob's. They both build the same bike in the same amount of time. Bob's customers don't care if Bob or Kate made the bicycle, since both bicycles are exactly the same, so Bob is only paying Kate half of the value of her labor. The rest of the money, the $25 that Bob pockets for himself, is called profit. Bob really likes profit because it means he's making more money per hour for the same amount of work.
So right here we have an assumption that's being made that he's going to be paying Kate less than he's paying himself. However, what we have to understand is he's paying Kate $5 an hour. However, she has none of the costs associated with the business. She doesn't have the overhead costs. She doesn't have the cost of acquiring clients. She doesn't have any of the costs that Bob has. So all those costs means that probably Kate's actually making more, even though she's being paid less than Bob, because she doesn't have the overhead that Bob does. She doesn't have to worry about acquiring clients. She doesn't have to worry about maintaining an office. She doesn't have to worry about maintaining a supply chain. She doesn't have to worry about so many things that Bob has to worry about and maintain. So this example already is showing some flaws in the understanding of how businesses actually work. It's very simplistic, and it's going to go further. It's going to create a narrative that the way Marx did, that is not necessarily a good reflection of how capitalist systems actually work. So let's watch some more.
Kate turns out to be a really great employee. She even comes up with some ideas for improving the workflow so that a bicycle can be built in half the time without sacrificing any quality. Customers are still willing to pay $100 for each bicycle, but now Bob only has to pay Kate $12.50 per bicycle instead of $25. He's essentially doubled the profit he makes on Kate's work per hour.
So this next part is the really deceptive part. As an employee shows more value, she's doubled the efficiency of the company. She's really increased the value that she provides. And she's also increased the value that Bob himself can provide. Well, that has an impact in terms of how Bob would view her. Obviously, she's a golden employee. She's an awesome employee. Well, in this case, you would probably pay your employee more. Because if you don't pay her more, well, she'll go to some other company that will pay her more. And that's how capitalism works. Because if there's not just a competition for the clients, there's actually competition for the employees. So you have to understand that there's that market for those employees. If you don't appreciate their value, then you're going to lose those employees and they'll just go somewhere else. So this thing where he's going to make more money, well, from her increasing the efficiency, well, sure, he'll make more money, but he would also compensate her as well. So very big misunderstanding there.
By now, Bob is pretty busy with marketing the business and meeting with customers, so he hires some more workers to work with Kate. He even gives Kate a raise, paying her $10 per hour to manage 5 workers who each make $5 per hour. Because of his employees, Bob's company is able to build bicycles 10 times faster than he was able to do on his own. Bob used to make $10 per hour building bicycles on his own, but now he's making $65 for every hour that the factory's operating. Now, Bob is pulling in a lot of profit. He invests a lot of this money back into the business. He rents out a bigger factory space and hires even more employees. He hires a staff to manage the business for him so he can spend more time jet skiing in Malibu. And the staff make the business even more efficient and manage to sell even more bicycles. And of course, Bob is taking his cut of profits from each new worker. Bob is accumulating wealth faster and faster, and life is looking pretty great.
So they sort of glossed over it there a bit, that he invested money into the business. He invested money to hire new employees. He invested money to hire people to manage the business. They gloss over that and make it sound like, oh, he's just playing somewhere, or he's jet skiing in Malibu. But the point is, he's made an investment. And whenever you make an investment, there's risk associated with that investment. It could be that the next day, nobody wants to buy bikes anymore. Well, he's taken a huge risk by setting up an environment where people can work that no one else is taking. He's the one that's taking that risk.
But, what's this? A big new bicycle factory has opened up in town, and they have a lot of big fancy machines that produce bikes twice as fast as Bob's little factory. Things are looking pretty bad for Bob and his employees. These fancy new competitors are selling bicycles for half the price of Bob's bikes, and sales plummet. Bob has to come back to town from Malibu for an emergency meeting. His staff gives him some pretty bad news. They're going to have to cut costs, and the only cost they can really cut significantly is labor. So Bob does what he has to do. He lays off half of his workers. To pick up the slack, Bob takes on some investors to buy some fancy new factory machinery. Fortunately, the plan succeeds. Bob is able to lower the prices of his bicycles, sales climb back up, and the crisis is averted.
So this next part is kind of interesting, the way they introduced the concept of competition. Now, as I was mentioning before, Bob is taking risks. He's investing in his company, he's hiring employees, he's doing many things, and there's a risk. Not only can you lose potential customers because of changes in the market, but there is an opportunity that if that happens when your business does really, really well, that other businesses will see that as a sign that, hey, maybe that they can come in and undercut you and get into that business. And they kind of suggest it, but they don't really explain it very well, that, well, this other company, it must have come up with solutions that allowed them to produce bikes at a much cheaper cost. Well, Bob, he invests his money and he comes up with similar solutions. He wouldn't just cut his labor force. That's not necessarily what they would do. Because it takes you invest in those employees, and if you cut your employees, well, that could be very detrimental to your business. So what you usually do is you invest into your company, and you find efficiencies that will allow you to grow. Sometimes you have to cut employees, but that's usually the last means that you would go, because you've built up the value in those employees. You've trained them, they've built skills, they added efficiencies to your business, just like Kate did originally. And you don't want to lose that. It could be detrimental to your business. And also, whenever you remove employees from your business, well, that cuts your capacity to produce more bikes or whatever it is that you're producing. So you don't want to cut employees just willy-nilly. It's a very serious thing to cut employees. But you do try to find efficiencies or innovations. Another thing that Bob could have done is develop new types of bikes, or he could have been constantly innovating. And this is another one of those risks that business owners will take, where they'll invest in their company in order to find new innovations that will either make their product different, stand out amongst the competition, or they'll find ways to reduce costs so that they can improve their product and make their product stand out. It doesn't mean that they have to always take the cost out from labor. It's not that the labor is the first thing you cut, or even reduce the salaries that you pay the employees. You might actually increase the payment that you provide to your employees, because, as I said, if they're providing value to your company, then you want to keep them and you want to pay them well. So this is a very communist, Marxist kind of way of thinking, that they don't really understand how the capitalists and the employees work together in a sort of harmony. Actually, there's a sort of balance between the two, where both have to make each other happy. If the employer doesn't make his employees happy, well, that could cause real problems. And if the employees don't make the employer happy, well, that can cause real problems too. So there's a balance where they have to make each other happy. So let's keep on going. You can see now it's kind of spiraling out of really the realms of reality on how businesses work. So we'll watch it some more and see how far it goes out of whack.
In fact, things go so well that Bob and his investors start looking for more ways to cut costs and increase revenues. Bob and his new partners quickly realize that they can cut their costs tremendously if they shut down the factory in America and export production to China. Now all of Bob's American factory workers are out of a job. Sorry, Kate. But now Bob is making more money than ever because he only has to pay his Chinese factory workers a fraction of what he paid his workers in America, which nets him even more profit per bicycle. Never mind that the factory workers in China are suffering, working 15 hours per day and barely able to survive on their crummy wages. Bob is making hand over fist.
So this is the next thing that's really funny, where they say, oh, we lost jobs to China or to some foreign country because of the evil capitalists, that they just want to pay their employees less, keep on reducing the costs, and therefore they have to go somewhere exotic where they can get cheaper labor. Well, this is not true, actually. If you run a business, generally you want to keep your employees. The only issue is it's usually the government that causes the problem. They'll create things like minimum wage laws, or they'll create unions. Unions will get created where they'll push for more a salary which is not in line with the value that the employees are creating. So if an employee is generating $10 worth of value per hour, well, you can't pay them $15 an hour for that value. They're just not generating enough value. So there's that critical balance that the employer has to understand of how much value can this employee create. It's actually very expensive to move your operations overseas. That's sort of a last-ditch effort that you would do, because what you want to do is maintain your employees and your business as much as possible, and not assume some huge costs of setting up a business elsewhere, where you have to train all the staff again and go through the whole process of developing that whole training method and production facilities. And it's very expensive to move overseas. Also, moving facilities over to China can be very dangerous, because the Chinese will set up parallel businesses where they'll actually copy your ideas and build cheaper mock versions of what you're creating, and they can actually put you out of business because they're ripping you off. So moving over to China is sort of the last thing. But what ends up happening often is that unions come in and they cause so much problems for the business owner, or the government creates so many regulations, that it's actually not that the employer wants to move overseas, it's that they are forced to by the regulations and the forced wages that the government or unions try to impose upon the company, not understanding that the value is well understood by the capitalists, and they're really working within those margins that they have. So China's last option. Actually, if you look at the United States now, you'll see that a lot of businesses are moving back because the regulations are being removed. So once government steps out of the way, often business will come back. Another good example of this is in Germany. Germany produces a lot of technology and a lot of high-end items because of the fact that their labor force is highly skilled and they can produce really high value. So as long as you understand value, you can always keep your facilities in whatever country you want. But as I said, this is a Marxist socialist video, so they're going to misunderstand how it actually works. Okay, let's continue watching.
But, oh, poor Kate. From the very beginning, Bob only paid her half of the value of her labor. She would have started her own bicycle factory, of course, but she just didn't have enough money to buy all the tools and equipment she needed, and she had a child to feed. She worked hard and hoped Bob would reward her for her good ideas. And when all was said and done, Bob fired Kate as soon as he realized he could make more money moving his operation to China. This is the nature of capitalism.
So I think this part is especially funny where he gets rid of Kate, and that's not something an employer would ever do. Probably if he really wanted to move his facility over to China, he would have had Kate take a more senior role where she would have gone over to China and trained the people there. So Kate, because she's an innovator, she's somebody that is entrepreneurial herself, well, that you reward those kind of people. You want to get those people into management or where they're taking a bigger role within your company because they can provide so much value to your company. As I said, value is the most important thing. That if they can provide value, well, you want to keep that because that value, you're making huge money off them. So the point is, you would never get rid of a Kate. Kate is gold, and you'd never throw away gold. So this is just silliness. You'd never get rid of your most valuable employees. It's just the goal of an entrepreneur is to build value, build as much value within their company as possible, because that's what creates profit. So they would never get rid of a Kate. So this is just silly, and they were trying to make it sound sad with oh, she had a child and all this crazy stuff. But it's just not the way capitalism works.
At every step of Bob's journey, he has stolen labor value from his employees and sacrificed their well-being to boost his own profits. Bob isn't necessarily a bad guy. He liked his employees. He felt terrible about having to fire Kate. He didn't want to lay anyone off, but Bob's competition forced him to cut costs wherever he could, and that means driving down wages. Of course, Bob could have cut down his own profits, but he's just not willing to make that sacrifice. See, as the owner of the means of production, Bob is a capitalist, and that puts him in a different class than the workers he hired. Being in a different class, Bob has different class interests than his employees. A worker's class interests will always drive them to seek higher wages. Every worker wants to try to earn as much of the value of their labor as they can. Meanwhile, capitalist class interests are to seek higher profits, and that means keeping wages as low as they can get away with. Bob didn't realize it, but these opposing interests mean that he was engaged in class warfare with his employees. Every decision Bob makes must drive him to increase profits, which means he needs to drive down costs, which will hurt employees, or drive up prices, which will hurt his customers and help his competition. Bob and all the other capitalists in the world have to act according to these principles. If they don't, other capitalists who are more ruthless and aggressive will drive them out of business. Under capitalism, all of human labor is harnessed to one force: the profits of capitalists. Nothing gets made and nothing gets done unless it benefits the capitalist class that rules over the working class. That's just the nature of capitalism. If you're a worker, then you are a victim of capitalism, just like Kate. The capitalists who own the company you work for are stealing the value of your labor and exploiting you. No matter how much they try to convince you otherwise, they really don't care about you. They can't if they want to keep lifting their profits. As soon as they figure out a way to make more money without you, you'll get cut out. You are engaged in class warfare whether you recognize it or not, and if you take the side of the capitalists, you are betraying your own interests as well as the interests of all your fellow workers.
So you notice that he uses words like stole labor, stole things from his employees. He's not a bad guy, but he stole from his employees because he didn't give them proper value, proper pay for their work. So, there's a real poisoning of the well there, that they're misinterpreting how business works. They're saying he's not paying them fairly. Well, he is paying them fairly by how much value that they provide. So this is just silliness. And then the fact that they're mentioning this competition is what caused all this problem. Well, competition is actually a good thing. It encourages innovations. It encourages companies to act in a healthy way. Usually when companies kind of falter is when they become a monopoly or very little competition. It usually destroys the company over time because they don't innovate. They don't develop their workforce. They don't increase the value of their workforce. They just go into a pattern of producing the same old. And competition is essential for capitalism to be successful. So the fact that they're trying to make competition sound like a bad thing, if it wasn't for that competition, had we just had a state-owned system of making bikes, the world would have been perfect. That's just silliness. So I thought that was especially funny. So you'll notice some more language being used here, victim, and the fact that they talk about it as a class warfare, that he's of a ruling class and he's, being like almost like a tyrant over this poor, exploited workers. That's not how business works. Business is about it's a team effort, that the entrepreneur, he's the vision. He's the one that kind of comes up with the idea for the whole business in the first place. He gives the employees an opportunity to really create value for themselves and increase their value so that they become somebody that not only could they work at his business, well, they could work somewhere else because they have that increased value. They've been given that opportunity to learn new skills, to develop their skills. So this is just silliness. It's typical socialist propaganda, where it's like he's looking at it as if they're exploiting workers. Well, it's not about exploiting workers. There's a free exchange of labor and the money that we pay for that labor. So it's just kind of silly that this is it's just nonsense at this point. But it's a typical socialist garbage. So yeah, there's not much more in this video. I'll let it play out just to show that I played the whole video and didn't cut anything from it.
You may have noticed something. There are a lot more of us workers than there are capitalists, so why don't we all just refuse to play along with this little game? Why do we allow capitalists to steal our labor value? Well, there are a lot of reasons, and we'll get into some of them in the next video on why capitalism sucks.
So at the end of this video, it's basically like a call for the workers to unite and rise up against their evil oppressor capitalists. And this is a typical Marxist kind of way of thinking, that if it wasn't for those evil capitalists getting in the way of the poor workers, then they would get more for the value of their labor. But that's just not the way how things work. It's just not how the way things works. The capitalists have taken risk. They've created a vision. They've created the environment to work. They've given so much to help their employees. So this is it's just kind of a bogus way of thinking. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a bit of a rant plus hopefully educational in terms of understanding how capitalism actually works. And understanding how socialists perceive capitalism, because they really don't have a clear understanding of how capitalism works. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment below. If you're a socialist, give me as much feedback as possible, because I love hearing from socialists, because they really strengthen my arguments, because I can understand. I like to try to understand how they think. So please comment, like, and subscribe. Bye for now.